You've spent your entire life trying to fix yourself, haven't you? Trying to sand down the rough edges, hide the parts that don't fit. Apologize for taking up space with your messy, complicated humanness. And somewhere along the way, you started believing that strength meant having no weaknesses, that power came from perfection, that the only version of you worth showing the world was the one with all the cracks filled in and painted over. But what if I told you that every ounce of energy you've spent trying to become flawless has actually been making you weaker? What if the very thing you think disqualifies you from being powerful is actually the source of a strength you can't even imagine yet? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what part of yourself you've been working hardest to hide. And if this resonates with something you've been feeling but couldn't name, hit that like button and subscribe, because what we're about to explore together isn't just another self-help concept. It's a complete reorientation to what it means to be human. This might be the conversation that changes how you see yourself forever. You wake up every morning and put on a version of yourself like it's clothing. At work, you're the competent one who never struggles, never doubts, never shows the exhaustion that lives behind your eyes. With your family, you're the strong one, the one who holds it together, the one who can't afford to fall apart because everyone else is counting on your stability. With friends, you're fun and light and easy, never too heavy, never too much, never revealing the weight you carry when you're alone. Online, you're curated and filtered and carefully composed, showing only the angles that make you look like you have it all figured out. And in every single space, you're translating yourself, editing yourself, performing a version of human that you think is acceptable enough to love. You know that feeling when someone asks how you are and you say, fine, but inside you're screaming? That moment when you smile and nod while your stomach twists with anxiety. That split second when you swallow what you really want to say and offer up what you think they want to hear instead? You've become so good at this translation that you barely notice it anymore. It's automatic, seamless. The gap between what you feel and what you show has become so normal that you've forgotten there was ever supposed to be alignment there. You've forgotten what it feels like when the inside matches the outside, when you don't have to think about how you're coming across because you're just being exactly what you are. But here's what nobody tells you about this performance. It's not free. Every time you hide a part of yourself, you pay for it. Every time you pretend you're not struggling when you are, not hurting when you do, not confused when you feel lost, you're spending energy you don't have to maintain an image that isn't real. And the cost compounds, the exhaustion builds. The distance between who you are and who you show becomes a chasm you can't cross anymore, even when you're alone, even when you want to, because you've been performing for so long, you're not sure which version is actually you. You've learned to apologize for your existence in 1,000 subtle ways. The way you make yourself smaller in conversations, always ready to defer, always quick to minimize your own needs. The way you laugh off your own pain like it doesn't matter. The way you rush to reassure others that you're fine, you're okay, you don't need anything, don't worry about you. The way you've trained yourself to sense what others need from you and contort yourself to provide it. Like your value is determined by how well you can anticipate and meet everyone else's expectations. You've become a master at reading rooms, at adjusting your energy to match what's required, at being whatever version of yourself keeps things smooth and easy and conflict-free. And beneath all of this, beneath the performance and the translation and the constant adjustment, there's a part of you that's exhausted beyond measure, a part that wants to stop pretending, a part that's so tired of holding it all together, of being strong, of having it figured out. A part that just wants to be seen exactly as you are, messy and confused and imperfect and struggling, and be told that this version, the real one, the one you've been hiding, is not only acceptable but actually valuable. That the strength you've been chasing doesn't come from eliminating your flaws, but from finally stopping the war against yourself. This didn't start with you. You weren't born believing you needed to be perfect to be loved. You came into this world whole and unself-conscious, expressing exactly what you felt when you felt it, crying when you hurt, laughing when you were delighted, reaching for what you wanted without shame or hesitation. You were congruent, authentic, fully yourself without even knowing there was any other way to be. But then you learned. You learned that some parts of you were acceptable and some weren't. That some emotions got you comfort and others got you rejection. That some needs were met and others were dismissed. You learned that love came with conditions, that acceptance had requirements, that belonging meant fitting into a shape that wasn't quite your own. Maybe it was subtle. A parent's disappointment when you weren't cheerful enough, a teacher's frustration when you didn't understand quickly enough, a friend's withdrawal when you were too much or not enough. Maybe it was overt, criticism, punishment, abandonment when you failed to meet expectations. Either way, you got the message. The real you isn't quite right. The real you needs improvement. The real you is too flawed to love as is. So you started editing. You learned to hide the sadness because it made others uncomfortable. You learned to minimize your needs because asking for too much made you a burden. You learned to laugh at jokes that hurt you, to stay quiet when you wanted to speak, to perform enthusiasm when you felt empty, to pretend you were fine when you were falling apart. You learned that the price of love was the abandonment of self, and you paid it. Over and over again, you paid it because the alternative, being alone, being rejected, being unloved, felt like death itself. These early lessons became your operating system, that critical voice in your head that tells you you're not good enough. That's not your voice. That's the voice of every person who ever made you feel like you needed to be different to be acceptable. That anxiety you feel before showing someone who you really are, that's not random. That's your nervous system remembering every time authenticity led to rejection. That exhaustion you carry, that's the cumulative cost of decades of self-betrayal, of choosing acceptance over authenticity, of prioritizing how others see you over how you experience yourself. And here's the cruel irony. The strategy worked. The performance got you what you needed. You learned to be what others wanted, and in return, you got approval, acceptance, love, or at least something that looked like love. You gotta belong. You gotta be included. You gotta avoid the crushing pain of rejection. So your nervous system cataloged this as success, as survival, as the right way to be human. And now, even when you want to stop performing, Even when you're desperate to just be yourself, every cell in your body is screaming that it's not safe, that showing your real self will lead to the very rejection you've spent your life avoiding. The mechanism that keeps you trapped is elegant and brutal. Your body learned that authenticity equals danger. Somewhere deep in your nervous system, there's a file that says being yourself. Rejection. Threat to survival. So every time you start to let your guard down, every time you consider showing someone who you really are, your body floods with anxiety. Your heart races, your stomach clenches, your throat tightens. It's not that you're weak or broken, it's that your body is doing exactly what it was trained to do. It's protecting you from what it believes is a mortal threat. And your mind, trying to make sense of this physical response, creates stories. Stories about why you need to keep performing. Stories about how you're not ready yet, not healed enough yet, not strong enough yet to show up authentically. Stories about how everyone else has it together and you're the only one still struggling. Stories about how your flaws are uniquely disqualifying, how your struggles are evidence of fundamental brokenness, how your imperfections make you unworthy of love. These stories feel true because they're backed by decades of evidence, by every time you tried to be yourself and got hurt, by every time you showed your real feelings and were told they were wrong. But here's what your body doesn't know, what your nervous system can't calculate. The world has changed since you were a child. The people around you now aren't the people who taught you to hide. The stakes aren't what they were when you were small and dependent and truly vulnerable to abandonment. You're not going to die if someone sees your flaws. You're not going to be destroyed if someone witnesses your struggle. The threat your body is responding to is a memory, not a current reality. But your nervous system doesn't know that. It just knows danger, hide, perform, survive. So you keep performing. You keep translating. You keep showing up as the edited version, the acceptable version, the version that you think is strong enough and good enough and whole enough to love. And with every performance, you reinforce the pattern. You prove to your nervous system that hiding works, that performing keeps you safe, that authenticity is too dangerous to risk. The cage gets stronger every time you choose it, and the exhaustion deepens. Because maintaining this performance requires constant vigilance. You can never fully relax. You can never stop monitoring how you're coming across, what impression you're making, whether you're being too much or not enough. You're always translating your internal experience into something more palatable, always editing your truth into something more acceptable, always performing strength when you feel weak, confidence when you feel uncertain, joy when you feel numb. The gap between your internal experience and external expression becomes a full-time job, and you're working overtime without even realizing it. But underneath all of this, underneath the performance and the stories and the nervous system activation, there's something else. Something that's been there all along, waiting. Your body knows the truth even when your mind has forgotten it. Your organism has wisdom that your conditioning tried to override. There's a part of you that knows, deeply knows, that this isn't sustainable, that you can't keep betraying yourself and call it strength, that the performance is costing you more than the rejection ever could, that the real threat isn't being seen. It's disappearing entirely into the version of yourself you created to be loved. I see you. I see the one you've been hiding, the one who's tired and scared and imperfect and struggling, the one who doesn't have it all figured out, who makes mistakes, who feels too much or not enough, who carries wounds that haven't healed and doubts that won't quiet. I see the one who's been performing strength while feeling weak, who's been pretending to be fine while falling apart, who's been smiling through the pain because you learned that your real feelings were too much for others to handle. I see the one who's been trying so hard to be good enough, to be worthy enough, to be acceptable enough, to finally deserve love without conditions. And I want you to know something. That one, the real one, the one you've been hiding, that's the one who's actually worth knowing, not the performance, not the edited version, not the one who has it all together. The real one. The messy one, the one with cracks and rough edges and parts that don't fit neatly into any category. That one is not only acceptable, that one is the only version of you that has any real power. Because here's what you haven't understood yet. The flaws you've been trying to hide aren't what make you weak. The hiding is what makes you weak. The performance is what drains you. The constant self-betrayal is what leaves you exhausted and empty and disconnected from your own life. Every ounce of energy you spend trying to be flawless is energy you can't spend actually living. Every moment you spend performing is a moment you're not present. Every interaction where you show up as the edited version is an interaction where you're not actually connecting, where you're not actually being seen, where you're not actually receiving the love you're so desperate for. You think the performance is what keeps you safe, but it's actually what's killing you, slowly, quietly. One self-betrayal at a time. You think hiding your flaws protects you from rejection, but it's actually guaranteeing that you'll never be truly known. Because even when people love the performance, even when they accept the edited version, some part of you knows it's not really you they're loving. It's the mask, the image. The carefully constructed version you created to be acceptable. And that knowledge, that gap between who you are and who they think you are, creates a loneliness so profound that no amount of approval can touch it. You can be surrounded by people who love the version of you you're performing and still feel utterly alone. You can receive all the validation in the world for your achievements, your strength, your having it togetherness, and still feel empty. Because the part of you that's actually hungry for connection, for being seen, for being loved, that part is still hiding. That part is still waiting for permission to exist. That part is still believing that it's too flawed, too broken, too much or not enough to deserve love as it actually is. And every time you choose the performance over authenticity, you're confirming that belief. You're telling that hidden part of yourself your right to hide. You're not acceptable as you are. You need to be different, better, more polished, more perfect before you can be loved. And that part believes you. It stays hidden. It stays small. It stays convinced that the real you is fundamentally unlovable. But what if it's not true? What if the thing you've been believing your entire life, that your flaws disqualify you from love, that your imperfections make you weak, that your struggles mean you're broken, what if that's the lie? What if the truth is exactly the opposite of what you've been taught? Her name was Maya, and she was the kind of person everyone described as so strong. She was the friend people called in crisis, the colleague who never seemed rattled, the daughter who held the family together. She had built an entire identity around being unshakable. around being the one who could handle anything, around never needing help because she was too busy being helpful and she was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't touch. It started small. A moment in a meeting where she didn't have the answer, and instead of admitting it, she deflected, made a joke, promised to follow up later. A conversation with her sister where she wanted to say, "I'm struggling too," but instead said, "I'm fine. Tell me about you." A date where she wanted to be vulnerable but couldn't access anything beneath the surface because she'd buried it so deep. Small moments of self-betrayal that felt like nothing at the time but accumulated into something unbearable. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. She was sitting in her car in the parking lot of her therapist's office, and she realized she'd been performing even there. Even in the one place that was supposed to be safe for truth, she'd been editing herself, managing her image, making sure she seemed like the kind of client who was doing the work, making progress, getting better. And in that moment, sitting in her car with her hands on the steering wheel, she felt the full weight of how tired she was. Not physically tired, soul tired. Tired of being strong, tired of having it together, tired of being the version of herself that everyone needed her to be. She walked into that session and said something she'd never said before. "I don't want to be strong anymore." And then she cried. Not the polite, controlled crying she'd allowed herself before, the ugly crying. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and ancient and hasn't been allowed to surface in years. She cried for the little girl who learned that her sadness made her mother anxious, so she learned to hide it. She cried for the teenager who learned that her needs made her a burden, so she learned to minimize them. She cried for the adult who had built an entire life around being what others needed while losing track of what she needed herself. And her therapist didn't try to fix it, didn't try to make her feel better, didn't offer solutions or strategies or ways to be strong again. Just sat there and witnessed it, held space for the grief and the exhaustion and the anger at having spent so many years betraying herself. And in that witnessing, something shifted. Not fixed, not healed, but shifted. Because for the first time in decades, Maya was being herself, messy and broken and falling apart. And she wasn't being rejected. She wasn't being told to pull it together. She wasn't being made to feel like her struggle was a problem to solve. She was just being seen as she actually was, and it was okay. The aftermath wasn't dramatic. She didn't suddenly become a different person. She didn't stop caring what people thought or start speaking her truth in every situation. But something had cracked open. She started noticing the moments when she was performing. Started feeling the exhaustion of self-betrayal in real time instead of just carrying it as background noise. Started experimenting with tiny moments of authenticity. Admitting when she didn't know something, saying "I'm not okay" when someone asked, letting people see her struggle instead of always being the strong one. And here's what she discovered. The thing she'd been most afraid of, rejection, abandonment, being too much or not enough, didn't happen. Some people didn't know what to do with her vulnerability, sure. Some people were uncomfortable with her not being the strong one anymore. But the people who mattered, the people who actually loved her, and not just the performance, they moved closer. They thanked her for being real. They shared their own struggles. They told her they'd been waiting for permission to be imperfect too. Maya learned that strength isn't the absence of weakness. Strength is the courage to be weak in front of others. Strength is letting people see you struggle and trusting that you're still worthy of love. Strength is choosing authenticity even when performance feels safer. Strength is saying, "I'm not okay," when every instinct tells you to say, "I'm fine." When you start choosing yourself, when you start letting people see the real you, flaws and all, the world doesn't end. But it does change. Some relationships that felt solid reveal themselves as conditional, built on the version of you that you performed rather than who you actually are. Some people who seem close drift away because they needed you to stay in the role you'd been playing, and your authenticity disrupts the system. Some connections that felt essential turn out to be built on mutual performance, and when you stop performing, there's nothing left. And this part hurts. It hurts to discover that some of the love you thought you had was actually conditional. It hurts to realize that some people preferred the mask to the face underneath. It hurts to lose relationships that felt important, even when you know they were built on pretense. There's grief in this realization, real grief. Because you're mourning not just the relationships, but the illusion that you were loved as you are. You're facing the truth that you've been performing for approval that was never really for you anyway. But here's what else happens. The relationships that remain, the ones that survive your authenticity, they deepen in ways you couldn't have imagined. Because now you're actually showing up. Now you're actually present. Now the connection is real instead of performed. When someone loves you after seeing your flaws, after witnessing your struggle, after knowing your weaknesses, that love lands differently. It touches the parts of you that have been starving for real connection. It reaches the places that approval could never satisfy. And new relationships form on different ground. You start attracting people who value authenticity over performance, who want real connection over comfortable pretense, who are doing their own work of choosing themselves. You build friendships based on mutual truth-telling instead of mutual impression management. You create intimacy through vulnerability instead of through being impressive. And these relationships, these real ones, they feed something in you that the performed connections never could. Your nervous system starts to learn something new. Authenticity doesn't equal rejection. Being yourself doesn't lead to abandonment. Showing your flaws doesn't result in being unloved. The evidence accumulates. Each time you're vulnerable and someone moves closer instead of away. Each time you admit struggle and receive compassion instead of judgment. Each time you let someone see the real you and they choose to stay. Your body starts to believe what your mind is learning. Maybe you're acceptable as you are. This doesn't mean everyone will accept you. Some people won't. Some people will be uncomfortable with your authenticity, threatened by your refusal to perform, confused by your willingness to be imperfect. And that's information. That's data about who has the capacity for real connection and who doesn't. That's clarity about which relationships were built on something real and which were built on pretense. It hurts, but it's also liberating. Because you stop spending energy trying to maintain connections that were never really serving you anyway. The loneliness of authenticity is different from the loneliness of performance. When you're performing, you're lonely even in a crowd because nobody actually sees you. When you're authentic, you might have fewer connections, but the ones you have are real. And that realness, that genuine being seenness, it fills something that no amount of approval ever could. You trade quantity for quality. You trade breadth for depth. You trade being liked by many for being truly known by few. And it turns out that being truly known by even one person is worth more than being liked by everyone. There was a man named David who spent his entire career climbing. Not mountains, corporate ladders, social hierarchies, the invisible rankings that determine who matters and who doesn't. He'd built an impressive resume, an enviable network, a reputation as someone who had it all figured out, and he was miserable in a way he couldn't admit to anyone, including himself. David's performance was different from Maya's. Where she performed strength, he performed success. Where she hid vulnerability, he hid doubt. His mask was competence, certainty, having all the answers. He'd learned early that hesitation was weakness, that questions were incompetence, that admitting you didn't know something was career suicide. So he learned to fake it, to speak with confidence even when he was uncertain, to make decisions quickly even when he needed more information, to never, ever let anyone see him struggle. The cracks started showing when he was promoted to a role that actually required him to know things he didn't know. For the first time in his career, he couldn't fake his way through. The problems were too complex, the stakes too high, the knowledge gaps too obvious. And instead of admitting this, instead of asking for help or acknowledging his limitations, he doubled down on the performance. He worked longer hours trying to teach himself what he should have learned years ago. He became defensive when questioned. He made decisions based on ego instead of information, and slowly, inevitably, things started falling apart. His breaking point came in a meeting where he was challenged on a decision. Instead of defending it, instead of performing confidence, something in him just gave up. He said, "I don't know. I thought I did, but I don't. I made that call based on incomplete information because I was too proud to admit I needed help." The room went silent. His colleague stared. He waited for the judgment, the loss of respect, the confirmation that admitting weakness was professional death. But that's not what happened. Instead, 3 people immediately jumped in with information he'd been missing. Someone offered to connect him with an expert. His boss said, "Thank you for being honest. Now let's figure this out together." And David realized that his performance of competence had actually been isolating him, preventing him from accessing the collective intelligence of his team, keeping him trapped in a prison of his own making. He started experimenting with honesty. Small doses at first, admitting when he didn't understand something, asking questions instead of pretending to have answers, saying, "I need help with this," instead of suffering alone. And he discovered something revolutionary. People respected him more, not less. His team trusted him more because he was real. His relationships deepened because he was accessible. His actual competence grew because he was finally learning instead of pretending. David learned that the performance of perfection doesn't make you strong. It makes you brittle. It makes you defensive and isolated and unable to grow because you can't admit what you don't know. Real strength is being secure enough to be uncertain, confident enough to ask questions, powerful enough to need help. Real strength is saying, "I don't know," and trusting that your value doesn't depend on having all the answers. The shift from performance to authenticity isn't a single moment. It's not like you wake up one day and suddenly you're real and everything is different. It's a practice. A series of small choices made over and over again, each one slightly terrifying, each one building on the last. It's choosing to say, I'm struggling, instead of, I'm fine, even though every instinct tells you to hide. It's letting someone see you cry instead of excusing yourself to the bathroom to pull it together. It's admitting you don't have it figured out instead of maintaining the illusion of certainty. And each time you make this choice, something happens in your body. At first, it's terrifying. Your nervous system floods with alarm signals. Danger, danger, you're being too real, you're showing too much, you're going to be rejected, hide, perform, protect. Your heart races, your stomach drops. Every cell is screaming at you to go back to safety, back to performance, back to the version that keeps you protected. But if you stay with it, if you breathe through the fear and let yourself be seen anyway, something else happens. The feared rejection doesn't come. The person across from you doesn't leave. They don't judge. They don't confirm your worst fears about being too much or not enough. Instead, often they move closer. They share their own struggle. They thank you for being real. And your nervous system files this as new data. Maybe authenticity isn't dangerous after all. This is how you retrain decades of conditioning. Not through understanding or insight or deciding to be different, through experience, through repeated experiences of being authentic and surviving it, through accumulating evidence that contradicts what your body believes about the danger of being seen. Each moment of vulnerability that doesn't end in rejection is a tiny rewiring of your nervous system. Each time someone loves you after seeing your flaws is proof that maybe you're acceptable as you are. The shift happens in your body before it happens in your mind. You start to notice that the anxiety around authenticity lessens, not gone, but less intense. You start to feel more settled in your own skin. The constant vigilance relaxes slightly. The exhaustion of performance becomes more noticeable, and the relief of authenticity becomes more appealing. Your body starts to prefer truth over safety, connection over protection, being seen over being liked. And as this shift deepens, you start to access something you've been disconnected from for years. Your own internal guidance system, that quiet voice that knows what you actually want, what you actually need, what actually feels right for you. The voice that's been drowned out by all the shoulds and supposed tos and what will people thinks. The voice that's been waiting patiently for you to stop performing long enough to listen. This is what it means to trust yourself, know the right answer, or make perfect decisions, or never struggle, but to trust that your internal experience is valid, that your feelings are real information, that your needs matter, that your truth is worth expressing even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable or contrary to what others want from you. To trust that you are the expert on your own life, that you know yourself better than anyone else ever could, that your organism has wisdom that your conditioning tried to override. Life after this shift doesn't look perfect. You don't suddenly have everything figured out. You still struggle, still doubt, still feel uncertain and scared and imperfect, but the quality of the struggle changes. Instead of struggling against yourself, trying to fix yourself, trying to be different than you are, you're struggling with life itself, with real challenges instead of imagined inadequacies, with actual problems instead of the problem of your own existence. You stop wasting energy trying to be acceptable and start spending it actually living. You stop monitoring how you're coming across and start being present to what's actually happening. You stop translating your experience into something more palatable and start expressing what's actually true. And this liberation of energy, this reclamation of all the resources you've been spending on performance, it's staggering. You didn't realize how much bandwidth the performance was taking until you stopped doing it, and suddenly have access to capacities you forgot you had. Your relationships transform. Not all of them survive, but the ones that do become deeper and more real. You start having actual conversations instead of performing connection. You start being honest about what you need instead of pretending you don't need anything. You start letting people help you instead of always being the helper. You start receiving love instead of just earning approval. And the difference between these things, love versus approval, connection versus performance, the difference is everything. You become more creative because you're not spending all your energy on impression management. More present because you're not constantly monitoring and adjusting. More alive because you're actually showing up instead of sending a representative. More powerful because you're working with your full self instead of just the acceptable parts. More resilient because you're not brittle with the effort of holding it all together. More at peace because you're not at war with yourself anymore. This is what strength actually looks like. Not the absence of weakness, but the integration of it. Not perfection, but wholeness. Not having it all together, but being honest about falling apart. Not being invulnerable, but being real. Not performing power, but embodying it through the radical act of self-acceptance. Right now, in this moment, you have a choice. You can keep performing, keep editing, keep showing the world the version of yourself you think is acceptable enough to love. Keep spending your precious energy on maintaining an image that isn't real. Keep betraying yourself in service of belonging. Keep waiting until you're perfect enough, healed enough, strong enough to finally be yourself. You can keep doing what you've always done, and you'll keep getting what you've always gotten. Approval without connection. Achievement without fulfillment. Relationships without real intimacy, a life that looks good from the outside while you're dying inside. Or you can choose something different. You can choose, right now, to start the experiment of authenticity. Not all at once, not perfectly, not by suddenly revealing everything to everyone, but by starting small, by choosing one person, one moment, one conversation where you show up a little more real than usual, where you admit you're struggling instead of pretending you're fine, where you share what you actually feel instead of what you think you should feel, where you let someone see the messy, imperfect, struggling version of you and discover that it doesn't end the world. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to be healed or whole or past your struggles. You don't have to wait until you're strong enough or brave enough or ready enough. You just have to be willing to try, willing to risk, willing to let one person see one real thing about you and discover that you survive it. That's the first step. Not a giant leap into total authenticity, just one small choice to be slightly more real than you've been. and then another, and another. Build in evidence, one interaction at a time, that you're acceptable as you are, that your flaws don't disqualify you from love, that your imperfections don't make you weak, that the real you, the messy, complicated, struggling, imperfect you, is not only worthy of love, but is actually the only version of you that has any real power. The invitation isn't to become someone different. It's to stop trying to be someone different. The invitation isn't to fix yourself. It's to stop believing you're broken. The invitation isn't to eliminate your flaws. It's to accept them as part of your humanity, as evidence that you're real, as the very thing that makes you relatable and accessible and capable of genuine connection. You've spent your whole life trying to be strong by hiding your weakness. What if real strength is letting your weakness show? What if power comes not from being invulnerable, but from being courageously vulnerable? What if the thing that makes you most human, your imperfection, your struggle, your messy, complicated reality, is actually the thing that makes you most capable of real connection, real love, real life? The choice is yours. Keep performing or start being. Keep hiding or start showing. Keep betraying yourself for the illusion of acceptance, or start accepting yourself and discovering who actually has the capacity to love the real you. The door is open. You just have to be willing to walk through it exactly as you are, flaws and all, and trust that what's on the other side, real connection, genuine love, actual peace, is worth the risk of being seen.